Fall-winter 1946-1947. We returned home with good memories, and as for production successes, there was something to show. A good number of barrels with cranberries and pickled mushrooms were taken to the camp. People who went to the forest sick and unable to walk returned healthy. The results are quite positive. From the outside, however, it does not appear that the senior team had undergone a course of practical training in the subject of the advantages of the Soviet collective farm system. It was not yet clear to me myself that the stability of the newly acquired Marxist ideological conviction had suffered noticeably from this practical training. I was a little afraid of the changes in the structure of the anti-fascist activists that might have taken place during my absence. Afraid, as it turned out, for nothing. The most surprising surprise for the returning senior activist was that no one had decided to replace him during his absence. Sasha greeted me cordially. The situation in the political labor has not changed in any way. Nothing special had happened. 5 people of the professional asset were in a state of complete balance of interests. The spheres of interest did not clash anywhere. Sasha Deputy defended all offensive on the chair of the superintendent. In the winter of 1946-1947, life in the camp went smoothly and straight. The catastrophe with food was not repeated. Without ersatz, we were given a proper ration. Not luxurious, but just enough to preserve the physical constitution of the guys. Dystrophics were few. The number of the health team remained stable at a low level and even decreased. My leisure time was filled with long conversations with Sasha, and I especially remembered his story about the capture. The Soviet participants in this event were at such a height that I am pleased to put them in a place of honor. Sasha told me that he came to the Eastern Front as an 18-year-old boy with the replenishment of infantry units of the Wehrmacht during the fall offensive on Moscow. He was assigned to a reconnaissance platoon, in the composition of which he moved far to the east, bypassing Moscow. As head sentries, 5 young soldiers, who had no experience in combat, unexpectedly came across a numerically much larger group of Red Army soldiers. The firefight did not take place because of the failure of the hand machine gun, and our young men were not prepared for hand-to-hand combat. They surrendered without a fight. A group of Red Army soldiers led by a junior sergeant took away the Germans' weapons and controlled the contents of the pockets of the captured Krauts. In Sasha's pocket, there was an unopened pack of cigarettes. The junior sergeant opened the packet, offered his men a cigarette, and miraculously returned the partially emptied packet to Sasha with a gesture of invitation to participate in a smoke break. Then they took the prisoners to the rear, and from that time on they never heard another shot fired during the whole period of this war. German prisoners at this period and in this part of the country were a rare phenomenon, an exotic. And that part of the Red Army in which they were taken had not yet been in battle, which means that the soldiers had not yet developed the hatred that is unleashed in battle at the sight of the death of comrades. Friendly treatment of the newly taken prisoners of war was correct, and in some places even polite. I also remember that Sasha fell seriously ill during the winter. He was taken to the military hospital in Vladimir, where he was treated and fully recovered in the company of a dozen prisoners of war, who were fed and treated there on an equal footing with the wounded and sick Red Army soldiers. Sasha spent 6 months in that hospital, and to this day is ready to confess to anyone that the military doctors and medical staff saved his life. We exchanged opinions with Sasha on political work. However, it was felt that the character of Sasha is more inclined to a balanced type, while I too often prevailed spirit of contradiction. But according to the laws of dialectics, it is such opposite characters during disputes leads to the final positive result. It was impossible to quarrel with Sasha. When I had to leave this camp, we parted as true friends. We met each other again only in 1998 and made sure that the mutual feeling of friendship remained in force. This summer was interesting in the field of amateur art, in connection with the fact that began to pay even a modest, but the salary, we organized a collection of money to buy a musical instrument. The result is stunning. We have an orchestra of 15 people. We got a piano, found skillful singers, and began to hold pop concerts. One of the orchestra members, a professional clarinetist, a former member of the orchestra of one of the famous opera theatres in Germany, solved the complicated issue of delivery of sheet music and scores. The musical memory of this musician resembled a miracle. I remember him sitting at a table with a violin on his knees, with a pencil in his hand, writing notes, playing the violin, writing again. He wrote by heart the scores of any piece he had once performed in the orchestra. The programs of variety concerts are full of versatility, from the music of the Middle Ages through European classics, operas and operettas up to dance music. The orchestra was led by Fritz, a member of the anti-fascist activists, who thus successfully removed himself from practical propaganda work. The situation was no worse with the theatre circle. Theatre performances are a great achievement to alleviate camp boredom. Artistic amateur performances undoubtedly made a contribution to raising the spirits of the prisoners. Also important is the fact that in order to ensure the effectiveness of the cultural work, the members of the orchestra and circles are partially or completely relieved from production work. It is that sprout which began to germinate in the barracks of the dystrophics in the Krasnoarmeyski camp has grown in recent years into a healthy plant, the flowers of which now bloom in concerts and production. The spirits of the prisoners of war have been raised by distracting them from depressing thoughts. There is no doubt about it, the positive results of these activities made themselves felt. One more news. A group of junior officers arrived in the camp who are put to work on an equal footing with ordinary prisoners. Among them there are a lot of representatives of academic intelligentsia. The thought occurred to me that in a discussion with such experts, I should test the armor-piercing power of my new Marxist worldview. For the officers were considered a staunch conservative factor in the camp. It should be noted, however, that there were no notable speeches by supporters of fascist ideology, or I did not receive any information about them. It seemed that the theoretical education I had acquired in complete isolation could not win the competition with such firm convictions that adults had developed over many years of life. My conversation partners were teachers, lawyers, doctors, priests, and similarly educated people. Often I emerged from the discussion as only the second winner. They all preferred multi-party democracy and free capitalist economy to Stalin's one-party system and planned economy. I did not want to admit that a pure theorist cannot be a successful propagandist and agitator, but I had to agree with the fact that the Soviet system is characterized by significant and very dangerous negative aspects for a human being. Doubts about the truthfulness of the propaganda material that was provided to us for preparation pushed us towards this. The practical experience of the collective system of agriculture, which I had just gained in the forest, also had a noticeable effect. I tried to push these doubts out of my thoughts and took up a more uncomplicated activity, music. I tried to follow the example of the orchestra conductor Fritz, who had so successfully switched to the cultural side of political work. And the orchestra needed a double bass player. The double bass was made by our own efforts in the camp. To make the strings we needed mutton and pig intestines, which were obtained without complications at the slaughterhouse in Dzerzhinsk. For all the time of creation of this masterpiece in the world of musical instruments, I undertook to organize the delivery of materials and to ensure that the necessary craftsmen were released from production work. Here and finished the work. The double bass shone with its innovation and was waiting for a master who would play it. The head of the orchestra had been encouraging me to master playing this giant for a long time, and finally convinced me to join his orchestra as an apprentice. On the basis of some violin playing skills, I began to master playing the double bass, from which, of course, agitation political work suffered noticeably, and it was a secret desire to get rid of. I deserved the reproaches and got what I deserved. Relations with the chief of political part, Vedenikov, changed not for the better. The following episode brought new troubles. A weekly newspaper for German prisoners of war, Freies Deutschland, was delivered to the camp with information about big world politics and small but important events that took place in Germany and in the Soviet Union. It was an organ of propaganda of a very high journalistic level, but this newspaper decided to interfere twice in the course of my life, a political officer. One day Vedenikov walks into the activist bureau and announces, "I decided to learn German. Write me a Russian and German alphabet." I quickly carried out the order and gave the alphabet to the chief. A couple of days later, Vedenikov literally burst into our bureau and in anger shouts, "You let me down. This is an unforgivable deception. I study, mastered the German alphabet. So what is the deception there?" I ask. "You're still cheating, aren't you? Here's a newspaper." I translated the title, read what comes out, Deutschland, and I know exactly what it means. Free Germany. In the last months of my collaboration with Vedenikov, I have not been able to wash off my reputation as a cheat. The next act of the production came in time for Christmas 1946. It was around the beginning of November of the 46th year, When on the way from the camp to Zavodstroi met a familiar foreman, we said hello, and he excitedly said, "Listen, Kolya, an echelon with German specialists who will work at our plant has arrived at the station. They are with their wives and children. Won't you go there to find out if there are any acquaintances there?" "Stop fooling me," I answer. "Although Germany is smaller than the USSR, but out of 80 million Germans I still know only 79 million. He laughs and repeats, "Go there to see if there are any strangers from the last million." I approached the station, where an echelon, 2 passenger sleeping cars and 12 freight cars, is standing on the sorting line. There are men, women and children standing in groups near the track, whose nationality I can't recognize from a long distance. I approach, greet them, explain who I am and where I am from. It turns out that they are specialists from those German factories, whose dismantled trophy equipment is brought to our 96th plant. Both German factories are located at a distance of no more than 50 kilometers from my home village. Here, there is something to exchange questions about. From them, I learn that the villages of my native land are intact. No bombs were thrown on them, and there were no battles near them. Oh, what a relief. Then there is reason to hope that my parents are alive. I remember that for several years I had a very pleasant correspondence with the daughter of an engineer of a company in Bitterfeld, where the equipment comes from. "Is there by any chance an engineer among you?" "No," they answered. "He managed to escape to the Americans in time, but your friend's classmate came with us." Conversations at the sorting station lasted for a long time. On leaving, I was given a loaf of German rye bread. That evening I gathered my best friends and a few important representatives of the German administrative top brass for an unholy communion. I gave each of them a slice of German bread instead of a wafer. The bread was rubbed with garlic, and a feast with memories of the motherland was organized. The arrived specialists had children from 3 to 18 years old. While the apartments were being built for them, the families lived in a hotel, 1 room per family. Some brigades of prisoners of war work on the construction of these apartments next to the hotel and keep in constant contact with the wives and children of the specialists. The women complain that there are no toys in the stores to present to the children for Christmas. The anti-fascist activists of the camp get into action. Among the prisoners there are handymen, tools are available, and there are ways to deliver various materials. An unofficial call to make toys for the children of German specialists is circulated. This call is accepted by the comrades much more readily than the call for socialist competition. Commitments are made according to ability. In the workshops and in the dormitory, building the production of various toys has begun, and the individual wishes of the children are taken into account. The result is amazing, and I, a simpleton, I propose to legalize all this. I appeal to Vedornikov with a proposal to show all the products at the camp exhibition before they are handed over to the recipients. He agrees. The rumor about the exhibition of toys reaches all members of the command staff, including the camp chief, whose sympathy for the Germans is limited to those representatives of this nation, which bring him labor glory. German specialists are not subordinate to him, and it is simply impossible to release the products of prisoners of war, subordinate to him, into the sphere of the personnel policy of the plant. The order is not to transfer the products to the specialists for the time being, weave different intrigues. Some of the superiors consider themselves entitled to distribute toys among the command staff. Vedornikov speaks out against such an idea, and for a whole week no decision is made. Tiny evening is near. We cannot be late. Gathers an expanded asset, which includes company commanders and brigadiers. A difficult question is discussed: to wait for a decision of the command or to take the risk of disobedience. The result of the vote: all are ready to organize a secret transfer of objects of the exhibition and to explain to the superiors how it could happen, a matter of senior asset. I consider this matter quite fair and do not mind to take the role of a scapegoat. I went to work the next morning. At the gatehouse is dark, burned-out light bulbs. It's freezing. Many people are dressed in wide chauffeurs' overcoats, under which contraband is hidden. They on both sides, as best as possible, cover them from the eyes of the watchman-clean comrades. Almost all city construction crews manage to get past the controllers without incident. Their boarding and leaving continues when they catch one prisoner, who hides a whole dollhouse under his overcoat. His figure turns out to be too inflated. The formal process of establishing the kind of violation of discipline begins. The object of the crime is taken to the duty officer's room. The guilty party is detained. and I stand beside him with trembling knees. God forbid that the bureaucratic formalities last as long as possible. It has not yet come to the point that the rest of the production could be on its way to Santa Claus. By the time the news of the violation of one prisoner reached the camp chief, and finally noticed the empty place of the former exhibition, at least 3 hours had passed, and during this period the transfer of toys was successfully completed. What I explained in front of the camp chief about the breach of discipline, I forget. A misunderstanding, perhaps. Personally, guilty were not identified, nobody was punished, but at least moral guilt was recorded on my account. Personal punishments have not yet followed. The political work continued with good results, mainly thanks to the tireless activity of my friend Sasha. His persuasion remained pristine, and he conducted conversations and made reports with clearly positive results. On the line of propaganda, he was our main horse. The rest of the activist members were mainly engaged in production work, and the overall result did not give any reason to remove someone from his position. Time passed, the trouble was approaching slowly. Vedenikov, of this I became convinced, transferred me to the category of German suspicious. All his actions and decisions became circumspect. He became afraid, as if this German had not outsmarted him. The uneducated and primitive nature of his thinking served as a breeding ground for distrust even in small things. He rightfully demanded that all programs of concerts and productions be translated into Russian and submitted to him for approval. When discussing individual positions, Vedenikov's distrust was always palpable. It was difficult to convince him of the innocence of poems, songs, musical pieces. Try, dear readers, to convince an absolute ignoramus that composers of Middle and Western European classics wrote their compositions earlier than 1933, and not after Hitler came to power. We had no encyclopedia whose statements about the lives of the noble composers could serve as proof. But music is still a simple matter, and not very dangerous. Poetry is much worse. There were experts in the camp who knew dozens and hundreds of poems, ballads, etc. by heart and recited them with great pleasure. In the absolute absence of fiction in German, the demand for literary evenings was great. Finally, the first program was drawn up. The connoisseur knows that it is difficult to guess the content of the poems by their titles. Linguists are well aware that a literal translation of the titles of poems may have nothing to do with their content. That is why Vedenikov was angry when he read the program, which consisted of a list of titles. He was angry and demanded a verbatim translation of the content of all the poems. There were 2 people in the camp at that time, whose level of knowledge of Russian allowed them to cope with the translation of simple texts. Neither I, who was one of the 2, nor any other non-professional translator could translate the poem. We decided to abandon the translation on the grounds of inability. Vedenikov reluctantly gave up his initial demand, but insisted that I should synchronously translate the poem to him during the recitation. It was about Guy. With trepidation, I was expecting trouble on my head, sitting on the left side near Vedenikov. Not having time to understand the content of the recited ballads and poems, I tried to whisper something in Vedenikov's ear in Russian. The tension was terrible. Sweat poured from his forehead and through his eyebrows into his eyes. Vedenikov sat like a stone sculpture with a menacing expression on his face, and I told him tales that I had to make up. The literary evening ended to the tumultuous applause of the audience. Vedenikov only remarked, "Well and Goey today buried," said, "Yes went," and in the notebook of the chief of the political part behind my name was put an additional red cross. From the central administration of the group of camps, 1469 received information that in the beginning of March, 47th year, there will be a competition of amateur art circles. 2 months are left for preparation. A commission is created, which travels around the camps, watches the productions and entertainers, gives evaluations and identifies the winners in individual genres. The best circles and orchestras are invited to the big bandstand in Gorky. I personally was not connected with this activity, but our orchestra was one of the first, where the conductor and organizer was a member of Activism who saw Frick. There is a rumor that there will be a performance on the bandstand and circles of the Gorky House of Culture. They are looking for an entertainer with knowledge of 2 languages. I don't know who made this decision, but I was chosen from a group of candidates. Task of the compeer is to announce the individual numbers of the program in German and Russian languages, as the variety show will invite a wide range of Soviet citizens. In addition, an interpreter would be needed for the comper of the Gorky circles. In the early March morning, the merry company leaves for Gorky by truck. The weather is fine, the sun is licking off the last bits of snow, the air is as soft as silk, and the mood of the boys corresponds to the state of the environment. The camp in Samuvo is packed to the brim with people. Similar groups come from all sides of the Gorky region. To organize a well-oiled mechanism is not an easy task. They calculate how much time is needed for all the productions. It turns out less than 4 hours. The program is constantly changing. Determine the order and sequence of calling to the stage of this or that orchestra or circle. In a word, the camp became like a beehive. I was puzzled to find out from the heads of individual circles the name of the number, and what about each special should be announced to the public. A difficult and serious task. But now the performance begins. The number of listeners in the courtyard of the camp, no less than 2,000, and before going on stage I have a frantic shiver of excitement. But resolutely rushing forward, I feel the same change of state of mind, which I have experienced more than once when flying in the fire of anti-aircraft guns. Fear makes way for a sober review of the situation. My first announcement is not without stuttering, but the audience reacts indulgently. As the orchestra plays, I stand backstage and rest. An officer from the camp command comes up, and with him is a girl. I'd like you to meet him. This is Collier, your interpreter, and this is Anna, the comper of the circles of the culture house, he said and turned away. It is difficult to convey in words the feeling that avalanche fell on me. She was a beauty in the purest sense of the word, about 17 years old. Slender figure in a long black dress, head raised, marvelous hair and shining eyes, gait and all movements reminiscent of a prima ballerina. I stand looking at this apparition from another world, unable to find the words to start a conversation, but she starts a business conversation without any shyness. Explains to me individual numbers of their program, what words, for example, will announce them, and obviously assumes that her words are properly recorded in my memory. But it was impossible to think so. My memory paralysis was beginning to set in, blocking the brain functions in my head. I was stunned with surprise and admiration. I don't know if she noted it or not, but I had distanced myself from the real world and was far away from the events of the entertainer in a state of vaporization. I am coming back when I am called to the stage to announce the next number of the program. Normal self-confidence slowly returns to me, and accordingly, not too quickly, the acoustic communication between us developed. My first question concerns her name, John. I mean, it's a French name, and so far I've never met a Russian woman with a French name. I don't remember any further topics of our conversation, but I look at this lovely image of a woman. Only 2 phrases were recorded verbatim in my memory. Standing opposite each other behind the stage. We talk and dive eye to eye. After a brief silence, a soft moan bursts out of me, and Nokia, what are you sighing? My reply, Jana, if I were a free man, I would ask you, would you go for a walk with me in the evening? Her answer, yes. Never in my life will I be able to forget the timbre of that single word. It was not an acoustic expression of agreement, but the bareness of the soul. That one word convinced me that something had happened in the soul of this angel, consonant with the mental turbulence I was experiencing. The intimacy of the 2 young people broke after 2 hours. The bandstand is over. Jean is surrounded by members of her circle. I'm called by comrades who have already boarded the platform of the truck. Sing with Jan without a farewell is a horror. For years she was the queen of my dreams. It's been 50 years since that unforgettable day, and I haven't stopped dreaming. Mutual relations with Lieutenant Vedenikov, the chief in the political unit, did not improve after the toy scandal before Christmas. He could not forget that the senior anti-fascist activist had let him down. A good diplomat should have known that a string can break under high tension. But I was born in early May, a Taurus, and Tauruses are not good diplomats, and so fate followed its own path. For the information of German prisoners of war in Moscow, with the participation of the German National Committee of Free Germany, was published in German weekly newspaper Freies Deutschland. From about the spring of 1944, this newspaper was regularly delivered to the camps in several copies. The reading of these newspapers was added to the duties of the activists as an activity to educate Germans in the spirit of socialism and communism. The palette of news included information about the life and political development of Germany, both East and West. Many of us did not like the style of propaganda. It was not only the politically ordinary prisoners of war who were dissatisfied with the one-sided presentation of events. The editorial staff was too clumsy in compiling articles, thus preventing activists from spreading the ideology that was considered socialist in the USSR at that time. One day Vedenikov turns to me, Seche, there's going to be a readers' conference of the newspaper Freies Deutschland. What is it? I ask. Representatives of the editorial staff are coming from Moscow, including, perhaps, even the editor-in-chief. Let the prisoners of war gather and express their opinion about the content of the newspaper articles. The editorial board will take into account the essence of these statements, and on this basis will improve the quality of the newspaper. But the speeches must be well prepared. It is necessary to choose capable speakers, give them a topic, and write an outline of the speech. The deadline is only 10 days. You'll show them to me for approval. Yes, Mr. Lieutenant, I answer, and my thoughts fly in a completely inadmissible direction. Why approve them? Why define the topics? Such speeches can have nothing to do with the actual opinion of the mass of prisoners of war. If there is a criticism in the outline, Vedenikov will not give confirmation. It is still important to tell the editors how to improve the effectiveness of newspaper propaganda, so I would have to speak without the outline and help the editors in this way. And that was the only purpose of my thoughts. We chose the participants of the discussion, gave them topics, jointly formulated the text of the speeches, and wrote outlines. I translated them into Russian, and I created my own speech in my mind. The notes were discussed with Vedenikov. He introduced many amendments, and after censorship the notes were distributed to the speakers after back translation into German. In order to ensure a large audience, the date of the event was set for a weekend. The canteen was cleaned, all sorts of slogans were drawn and decorated on the walls, the speaker's podium was made and decorated with red cloth. In a word, they prepared a big celebration. A delegation from Moscow, including the staff of the editorial office and other institutions, including a representative of the National Committee for a Free Germany, arrived. A mass of listeners gathered from among the prisoners of war and the camp authorities. One of the Moscovites made a report. Vedenikov informed about the progress of political work in the camp and praised the anti-fascist activity, of which I was the senior. The debate began. The comrades prepared for it, who strictly adhered to the confirmed notes, the content of which was free from any criticism, spoke. Moscovites sat in the presidium with an expression of pleasure on their faces. It seemed that the reading conference would be quite successful, and the chief of the political unit would receive the highest praise from the higher authorities. He had the right to think in this direction, if there was not present in the audience a naive fool by the name of Fritsch. I was bored and annoyed to listen to this meaningless production, all the more annoying because I was supposed to be in charge of the event. I stood up on the podium, asking if there were anyone else who wanted to speak. There were no more, so I began in this sense. Dear guests and comrades, we highly appreciate the help of the Soviet government, which in the matter of political education of the former soldiers of the fascist army is represented by the publication in German. It is very useful for political work to have up-to-date material on the course of events in Germany and throughout the world. We often and regularly hold readings of the newspaper and discuss the content of newspaper articles. At the same time, however, I often find it difficult to answer the comrade's question as to why everything in the Soviet Union and in the Soviet occupation zone of Germany is excellent and positive, while, according to the newspaper, everything is bad and negative in the West. I also believe that the news is presented too white and black. I asked the editorial board to take into account that the world is neither white nor black, but is in fact motley. Oh, how proud I was! I made my speech without an outline and expressed everything I was convinced of. I looked around me, but my eyes stopped on Vedenikov's face. What's the matter with him? Is he ill? His face is pale, distorted. His color changes to dark red. His body is as if in convulsions. Too slowly it comes to my mind that he is not sick, but that he is shaking with violent anger, and in time it becomes clear to me that I am the cause of this attack. I notice that on the faces of the other representatives of the camp commanders the expression is less angry, but still not at all friendly. Vedenikov rises, runs to the podium, and without further explanation declares the reading conference over. He pays no more attention to me. The audience disperses, only the anti-fascist activists remain in the dining room. From Vedenikov I hear only 2 words. I won't leave it like that. And he left. Comrades look at me as the participants of the funeral procession look at the dead man in an open coffin. I can hardly confess that I made an unforgivable blunder. I didn't sleep well that night. That there would be consequences was clear, but what they might have been. The next morning, I was sitting in the office of the Activist reading, as I should, Pravda or Izvestia. It is necessary for the senior activist to be aware of political affairs. Suddenly a lieutenant who is on duty at the gatehouse opens the door wide open. Fritz ceremoniously gives an order. Betschik, pack your things. Go to the transport. In half an hour you will be at the gatehouse. He said, turned his back and walked away. Now I was stunned, probably pale. Such a sentence was unbelievable. What to do, who to turn to for help? You can't throw a man into a black hole for one blunder. But there was no one to turn to. The chief of the political unit was absent. The camp chief had looked at me with a sidelong glance before, i.e., I should not expect help from him. At least talk to my comrades, to my friends. But there are none. The work brigades have long gone to the factories and construction sites. The last hope is Seisha, but it turns out that he and his brigade went to the fact. It's hard for me to gather my thoughts. What did he say, that duty officer? To pack up? What a prisoner of war's personal property, according to the official regulations, consisted of the following item. No, clothing worn on the body. A spoon as the prisoner of war's most important tool. Ebola as the most important utensil. A wallet with photographs of relatives and friends, if any were left with the prisoner after the first search when he was taken prisoner. That is all. And what have I got? There is a spoon reliquary, which I made on New Year's Day 1944 at the shipyard in Krasnoarmeysk, but there is no kettle. Soup and porridge are given to the members in bowls which are in the kitchen. There are no personal souvenirs from home, because when flying to the front, crew members were not allowed to have other materials with them than a simple ID card. But I had a whole library of both political subjects and fiction of the genre. There was a whole archive of notes for work with circles studying a short course in the history of the All-Union Communist Party, the history of the German labor movement, historical materialism, etc. There were postcards I received from the Soviet Union. There were postcards received from parents since 1945 and photographs taken in the camp by the official photographer. There were writing utensils, a spare pair of shoes, some items of uniforms, intended mainly for camouflage on uncensored excursions, etc., and some other things. As a result of the fact that I took part in the resettlement from the peat camp in the village of Pira to the 96th chemical plant not as an ordinary prisoner of war, but as a company commander, the amount of personal property was not reduced when I entered the new camp. Besides, all the personnel of the peat bogs moved to the empty camp zone without the pedantic search to which newly arrived prisoners of war were subjected. What am I now? A cadet, a senior asset, or a private POW? I packed my things, taking into account that I am not a private yet. I got a sugar sack from the chief cook and started stuffing it with my belongings. The question of who I was soon and unexpectedly solved. The duty officer appeared again, obviously in a very bad mood. What's all this junk in the bag? Throw all this junk out, says, takes the bag, pours out the contents on the floor and starts sorting. In my direction he sticks a short course in the history of the All-Union Communist Party, postcards and photos. Take this and let's go. I'm once again an ordinary prisoner of war. I had learned that in Soviet-style political labor any misdemeanor leads to the strictest sentence without regard to previous merits. We went to the gatehouse, where the guard on duty handed me over to the escort, with whom we went on our way to where unknown. The notion of psychoterror was not yet born in those years, but from the position of the present time this way of expulsion from the sphere of successful activity can certainly be called psychoterror. When I came to my senses, my soul began to ache, not because I had been removed from my post, but because the separation from my comrades, from my friends, had turned me into a hermit again. I had known many of my comrades in the camp since 1944, when we lived in Talitsa camp, 165. Together we went through the experiences of the peat camp. Together we lived and worked in the rather bearable environment of the factory camp. And now I'm going to be sent somewhere where there may not be a single acquaintance. Sad. I remember the massacre of the camp chief, Peter, who was caught in the arms of the wife of a Soviet officer. He was put in a punishment cell and then transferred to a punishment camp. I wonder where the escort is going. After 200 meters it becomes clear that the road does not lead to the railway station. The worst fear can be dismissed because the notorious special regime camp, where I could be sent, is located to the north of the city of Gorky, at such a distance, which can be overcome only by railroad. within reach of a pedestrian, there is only Le Gotst-Vorneau, 469-1, the inhabitants of which were often met at the factory and at some construction sites. It is known that they live there no worse than we lived in La Gotst-Vorneau, 469-3. No need to worry, we'll see. La Gotst-Vorneau. 1 is located at a distance of about 2 kilometers from No. 3, and the procedure of accepting a prisoner of war from another camp is carried out with the same pedantry as with a new arrival from the Far East. Search, disinfection, issuance of clean linen, kettle and blanket. I am frightened when the duty officer leads me to the living quarters. The front door is locked. The windows are protected with barbed wire nets. He opens the door, gestures for me to come in, and locks the door behind me again. At dusk I see a man lying on the bunk. He answers my questions unfriendly. By my appearance, I have fallen into the wrong society. I am not wearing a military uniform, but a civilian suit made of uniform material. By appearance, I am not a private, but I managed to learn that I have fallen into the special regime zone that exists within this camp. One is put into this zone for various reasons, including breach of discipline. The period of stay is at least 3 months. The penalty company works on heavy sections, not 8, but 10 hours, and in the camp people are deprived of freedom of movement, are confined in a room without any ventilation, where the atmosphere is saturated with smoke, fumes and gaseous waste of the human body. To the restroom are sent in groups under the custody of the VCE. In a month of existence in this maddening confinement, I failed to break out of my solitary position. The other penitentiaries considered me an outsider and deliberately scolded the one who by appearance belonged to the officials. Both suspected that I was an informer of the operative commissioner. I was attached to a team of diggers who, together with other teams, were digging a trench for laying a sewer wire. The soil was light, sandy, the depth of trenches above the surface of the territory up to 12 meters, and had to be shoveled up on 6 ledges, and the norm was 8 cubic meters per person per shift. The work, similar to building pyramids in old Egypt, the efficiency is negligible. The crazy thing was that there is a large walking excavator nearby that would have dug this trench in 2 or 3 shifts, while 100 prisoners of war had already been digging for almost a month. The excavator cannot be repaired. There are no spare parts. The work is exhausting and boring, and we should not even think about 100 fulfillment of the norm. We fulfill then at 20, then at 30%. For this cut daily portion of bread, we get 400 G instead of 600 G. All my attempts to negotiate with the foreman of the construction site on the issues of state norms for excavation works were unsuccessful. Senal officers are forbidden to maintain contacts of any kind with the civilian population. I have experience outlining the Labour Standards Handbook, feeling that the wrong standard applies to our work, but there is no way out. For a month I have been digging, and this month is remembered as special not only because of the hard and dull work. So back in the previous camp I had to be convinced that the operations department recruited prisoners of war and organizationally supported a whole system of informers, the purpose of whose activities I did not understand at the time. To the actions of this organization aimed at detecting underground fascist groups or at uncovering secret breaches of discipline. It was impossible to determine, but we knew that any statement made in the circle of comrades could be brought to the attention of the operational department. It was possible that the best friend was working as a faithful servant of Soviet intelligence. Some of the runners, as we called them, were demasked by the carelessness of their customers. The operative chief of Soviet intelligence in the camp worked mostly at night. To deliver denunciations, the runners were usually awakened in the middle of the night, taken somewhere, and returned an hour to an hour and a half later. There was a rumor that as a reward for their good work, they were given food and even alcohol. I personally did not pay any attention to this organization. In the circle of the anti-fascist activists, I expressed my opinion relatively lightly, which did not always coincide with the position of the editors of Pravda and Izvestia. I still considered myself a convinced communist, or at least a socialist. I saw no reason to fear punitive measures on the part of the political authorities. How naive I was. I woke up, lying on the bunks. It was dark in the building. In the dim illumination from the lamps above the fence of the camp zone, the face of a man in a military uniform was leaning over me. Is it a dream? No, get up, get dressed quickly. And as I got dressed, it became clear to me where the trip was going. The chief of intelligence is waiting for me. I got up, got dressed, the escort is standing silently waiting. Well, let's go. I follow the escort and feel on the back of my head the gazes of awakened comrades. Now I am finally compromised. There is now a reason to suspect that I'm one of the runners. In the room of the operational department, the escort hands me over to an unfamiliar young man in civilian clothes, who greets me with exquisite politeness and asks me to sit down. The second person in the room is an interpreter familiar to us, Vera Gelfman. Without any explanation, they begin the interrogation, the initial part being the recording of personal data, including all nephews up to the great-great-grandfather. This procedure, according to experience, lasts at least half an hour and serves, as some clever Germans suggest, to identify deceivers who conceal their real identity. The inconsistency of the interrogated person's statements at successive interrogations is considered evidence of deliberate deception, behind which some special enemy may lie. The interrogation through the interpreter is delayed. I ask permission to continue the interrogation in Russian without the interpreter's mediation. As soon as I start speaking in Russian, I notice an expression of surprise and, as it seems to me, triumph on the interrogator's face. During the interrogation itself, he keeps asking the same questions over and over again about my stay at the boarding school. He nags me with questions about how and where I learned Russian, when and where I served, in what military units. The interrogation lasts more than 2 hours. I carefully read the voluminous protocol, which obviously does not please the interrogator. He is impatient and dissatisfied with me. I signed the protocol page by page. The interrogation is over. The interrogator himself personally escorts me, I think, to the building, but I was wrong. We go up the stairs to the punishment cell, which is in the attic, without giving any explanation. He leaves me in this bare room without any furniture. No chair, no bunks, sitting only on the bare concrete floor. It's hard to calm down. For what sin after the special regime now I'm imprisoned in the punishment cell? Have I fallen between the millstones of the ruinous mill of political intelligence? I woke up to the sound of unlocking the lock. The escort orders me to follow him. He leads me to the gatehouse, where the brigades are assembled to go to work. Breakfast is out of the question. I receive lunch and dinner in the normal order, but the whole procedure is repeated the next night and then 5 more times. The interrogator is getting more and more picky about my daily schedule and subjects of study at boarding school. He asks 100 times why I left the school early, and again wants to know what was the real purpose of studying at this school. When later we discussed these events among friends, we came to the decision that they thought it was impossible for me to quickly master the Russian language. They must have suspected that the notorious school trained spies and saboteurs, with Russian being the main subject of study. To the honor of the interrogator, I must confess that he did not beat me, and except for confinement in the punishment cell and deprivation of breakfast after the next interrogation, he did not allow any abuse. According to the stories of some comrades, I should have been afraid of various tortures, in the catalogue of which the hunger cell was considered a place of rest. The 7th protocol was signed by me, and the collation of all protocols to reveal circumstantial evidence of deception, apparently, did not lead to the discovery of any evidence of deception. Then the interrogator tried to succeed in another direction. Are you a cadet of the Central Anti-Fascist School? Yes, I am. Are you ready to fight for the liberation of Germany from fascism? I am ready. Then you must also fight in the camp. I was a propagandist in the previous camp. I was a propagandist. Why was I expelled? Why did they put me in a special regime zone? You must atone for your guilt by active action. What guilt? He keeps silent, but continues. There are disguised war criminals among your comrades in the camp. They are cunning and dangerous. They must be identified and brought to the punishment they deserve. You can help us find these kinds of criminals? My God, I wonder how to get away from this mill. Do what? That's not an empty excuse that came to mind. You said they're war criminals, clever and cunning. They found out a long time ago that I was a cadet, an anti-fascist. And to tell an anti-fascist a true autobiography would be like committing suicide. And such a person, who managed to hide under a false identity for the 2nd or 3rd year, would not commit suicide. Judge for yourself, I'm completely unsuited for such a struggle. I tried to convince the interrogator not with 2 or 3 phrases, but with the whole speech of the defense counsel before the court. Only the essence of the speech is presented above. He plunged into reflection and finally proposed to report on the general mood of the prisoners of war in the camp. It is very dishonest to act as a secret informer, There is no doubt about that, but is it not possible with a report on the general mood of the comrades to achieve the correction of faults and deficiencies in daily life? With such reasoning, I tried to console my conscience when I agreed to report on the general mood of people in the camp upon request. Reviewing my activities under this contract with the devil, I remember a gypsy fortune teller who in 1944 informed me that happiness would be my companion, with only a minor vice, that happiness would often appear as a salvation from misfortune. Twice I was summoned to report. Twice I composed a report with the sole purpose of accusing no one personally of anything. Whether the staff of the operations department became convinced that I would be of no use, or whether I was simply forgotten, or whether Vera Gufman decided to use the opportunity of access to documents in the operations department to relieve me of this burden. But today there is a reason to assume that an experienced intelligence professional knows how to determine by the character of a person fit or not fit for covert intelligence. I assume so because the GDR State Security in 1961 made inquiries about in my personal file from the archive of the State Security, which was given to me in 1996. On the first page of the task is formulated. The candidate maintains personal contacts with a senior employee of the post office of the Farge in Hanover. The candidate's prospective task is to recruit this person to cooperate with us. The candidate was me, and the target person was a nephew with whom I had very close contact. He came to visit us, and correspondence was very frequent. According to the documents of my personal file, at first they questioned trusted persons at the workplace and neighbours of my apartment. Then for 6 months, they eavesdropped on all my phone calls. The conclusion written after the 9-month reconnaissance reads, "The target person has not travelled to the GDR in the meantime. The result of the investigation of the candidate is that his reliability in relation to the assigned task is very doubtful. Therefore, the case is closed." Personal contact with representatives of this institution during the entire period of the investigation did not take place. I am very grateful for the intelligent assessment of that MGB officer. Throughout my working life, I've always managed to prove my reliability in any professional endeavour. I was lucky that an experienced psychologist intelligence officer was convinced of my unreliability for underground work. I was transferred to a brigade of free prisoners of war, the fulfillment of norms in which was even worse than in trench digging. On average, they gave less than 20. Try to improve your labour performance, some unknown officer instructed me. Now in the morning I am released from the contingent of penalised men, and in the evening I have to return to the prison in the prison. Still, my life was made easier by the fact that the working hours were reduced by 8 hours and contacts with the site superiors were not prohibited. The task of the brigade was to unload wagons that came from Germany with so-called trophy equipment. Later I learned that before the amount of reparation deliveries to the USSR was established, special units of the Soviet Army started to dismantle whole enterprises in the Soviet zone and send the equipment to the Union in the form of trophies, which were not counted by their value in the amount of reparation deliveries. On the platforms were all sorts of apparatus from chemical plants, measuring devices, whole switchboards, metal structures of dismantled buildings, in a word, complete workshops of chemical plants that used to work near their native village. The brigade is made up exclusively of newcomers who were taken prisoner in the spring of 1945. Jokingly, they are called the last draft, i.e., by the end of the war they had scoured the management offices where these people sat behind a desk during the war. Physical work is a stranger to them. They simply do not know how to set in motion multi-ton heavyweights without lifting and transportation mechanisms as tools they put at our disposal. A crowbar for each crew member and railroad ties in unlimited quantities. Of the speed of unloading rail cars in the Union was of exceptional importance. The downtime of a wagon beyond the allotted time entailed the invitation of the prosecutor to the field, and the latter, in turn, generously distributed his gift. The wagon was served, so you have 6 hours to unload. On the basis of theoretical knowledge about the law of leverage acquired at school, and during 3.5 years of captivity, I managed to master some techniques of effective use of the most universal tool in Russia, a crowbar. Besides, I had a normally functioning brain and, most importantly, a desire to get percentage bread and other supplements for fulfillment and overfulfillment of norms. Less than a week passed, and for the first time the brigade received a full ration of bread. Comrades were surprised that with less physical effort it was possible to achieve a much better result. I did not know specifically, but all the while I felt that I was under special surveillance. The German commander of the punishment company, who obviously had good relations with the camp authorities, revealed to me that I was under a kind of The chief of the 3rd Lag unit had obtained an order from the camp group management. Pau Fritschie was never to be allowed into any position again. "You try as hard as you like, you won't get a better life by doing so," was roughly how he formulated his opinion of my situation. But such is my character, to spend time without making concrete progress. I couldn't in captivity, and I can't until today. Success gives me wings, success restores my physical strength, and keeps me mentally balanced. I will show them. That has become my motto, and I showed them. One fine spring day, the team is busy unloading from the platform welded 1.5 meter long, I-beams 18 meters long. The task is not easy. There are 20 people without a right hand, each of them has a crowbar, and the foreman stands hand and mentally engaged in compiling the optimal technology of transfer of these trusses from the height down to the lane near the railroad track. The brigade is standing waiting for the command. "I'm tired of waiting," I shout. "Take the crowbars, everyone upstairs." I myself stayed downstairs, giving commands, and farm after farm went down. A citizen is standing not far from the place of the event, watching the course of events. He doesn't move. We take a break for a smoke. That citizen approaches and addresses me in German. "You brigadier?" "No, the foreman is over there," I reply in Russian. "Why aren't you a brigadier?" "I done something wrong in the field of political work." "That's no reason to exclude a person from the labor sphere." He shakes his head and leaves. We continue work. We finish unloading relatively quickly, and I see that the citizen comes 3 more times, looks, leaves. The work is finished. We have 100 fulfillment of the norm. We are sitting smoking. The observer comes again. "The result is good," he says. "And the car did not jump off the rails. I'll tell the standardizer to give you 120, but let's get acquainted. I'm Nikolai Porfiryevich Kabuzenko, head of the trophy equipment base. Can you read and write Russian?" I know how to read and write Russian without guaranteeing that the spelling rules will be followed without error. "What kind of education?" "Gymnasium." "You'll be a foreman." "Don't forget the political disgrace." "Nonsense. There's a contract between the factory and the camp management on the provision of labor. The contract stipulates, among other things, that the factory management has the right to choose prisoners of war who, in their opinion, are capable of being responsible for foremen and other special positions." He is mistaken, I think. The political anathema to the industrialist is unbreakable. In fact, I was wrong. I returned from work in the camp, and the next day I was taken to the premises of the German senior camp. A Soviet officer sitting there says to me, "What have you done there at the factory? A riot or something?" It turned out that I was between 2 fronts. As a rule, no good can come out of such a situation. What should I say? It's best not to say anything. I'm surprised at the friendly tone of the conversation. Brigade no. 426 is the worst in the camp in terms of fulfillment of norms. You have a task to improve the situation. You are appointed a brigadier. If you don't succeed, we'll send you back to the special regime. Turning to the camp chief, he continued, "Give him a bed in the general ward." So instead of 3 months of special treatment, I was left with 1. I can't go back there. The senior asks me to go with him. We go around the corpse, enter a small room with single-tier bunks, shows me a free one and says, "Now here is your place of residence. It's cozy here, but I warn you, Captain Glazunov has been appointed head of the camp. If he catches you in this room, it will be bad for you." For all my life, I could not find out who in this alien camp was my patron and why he chose me for guardianship. Someone was in charge of this theatre, and I, a naive young man, just did not understand in which play what role I play. How the senior knew about Captain Glazunov's hostility to me, who ordered him to place me in the living quarters of the cooks, I don't know. There existed in the camps of the Gorky region a kind of mafia of Stalingraders, which set the task of helping other victims before its members. Senate influential positions in the camps were held by Stalingraders, so I assumed that I was considered their man. I was not allowed up to the control center of this secret union, and I had no desire to get acquainted. Thus began the most interesting, the most instructive, and the most pleasant for me period of military captivity. The next morning, Nikolai Porfiryevich Kabuzenko met us at the factory gatehouse. He called the foreman and handed out orders for unloading of newly arrived rail cars, orders indicating the place of parking and the number of the rail car. For the first time he did so. Until now, only the number of wagons and the place of unloading had been called, with the result that the foreman chose a lighter and uncomplicated load as a result of a kind of hand-to-hand combat. I see my wagon and know that it is undoubtedly an uncomplicated load. Large I-beams again. We discussed the technology of unloading and started working, but fate once again showed me who exactly is in charge. We went up to the cargo. 20 people are standing with a crowbar each, and on command alternating, some put the tip of the crowbar in the slot and roll. Others put crowbars deeper and repeat this technique until the farm is not tipped over and on the slope of sleepers slides down. The guys are not concentrating, talking among themselves, not listening to commands. I stand with them in a line, helpless. I decide to go down and command, having a general view. I made up my mind and jumped down, but some unreal force caught my right leg, and I fell head down from a height of 2.5 meters. I managed to protect my face with my forearms before I hit the ground. A sharp pain slices my back, and I lie there unable to breathe. I want to breathe, but I can't. Very slowly, normal bodily functions return, and strangely enough, I can get up and walk. I examine the place of the fall, and a gypsy fortune teller stands in front of me, falling. My forehead past the sharp steel edge of the I-beam at a distance of no more than 5 centimeters. What did she predict? A lucky escape from deep misfortune or, say, danger. The guardian angel flew up late but still in time. My back suffered with the pain I fiddled with for 2 or 3 years, and today at the age of 75, I am proud that my spine is completely free of any defect. Happiness? Me finished unloading by lunchtime, 100 fulfillment of the norm. The next day the same picture, but Nikolai Porfirievich gives me 2 orders. Try at least partially unload the second car, he says, looking me in the eyes with an expression of some special understanding. The second car was unloaded completely, 200. I must confess that my wagon or my wagons were standing separately, so that the other foreman did not notice the special complexity of the cargo. There was no doubt that Nikolai Porfirievich controlled the supply of new wagons during off hours and personally chose more convenient copies for me. It was felt that he wanted to make a certain contribution to the cause of my salvation from returning to the special regime zone. And so it went on until the end of the month. In the camp they announced the labor indicators on average for the month. The average fulfillment of my brigade was not far from 150. I confess that I achieved such a result not quite legally, at the expense of less fulfillment of other brigades, but their foremen were not threatened with imprisonment in a special regime zone. It is felt that Nikolai Porfirievich with great interest observes the work of all the brigades at the site, but most often visits the workplace of my brigade. In addition, I suspect that the Russian standardizer base, with some favor to us, chooses norms from the Directory of State Norms for lifting, transporting and loading and unloading work. Members of my brigade, for the first time for all time of their stay, in this camp receive a daily ration of bread not 400, but 600 G. And addition of porridge and soup for dinner. In case of overfulfillment, by 50 the bread ration is increased up to 800 G. An ordinary Soviet citizen at that time could only dream about such a bread ration. We were also informed that the earnings had risen to the limit above which the prisoners of war should be paid in cash. This means that the mood is improving because the above-mentioned benefits are achieved not through physical effort, but through a well-thought-out unloading technology. Certain can see that things develop according to the laws of dialectics. In the course of quantitative changes, the upcoming leap to a new quality makes itself felt. With a very important expression on his face, Nikolai Porfirievich invites me to a conversation, asks me to sit in the office of the head of the base, treats me to tea and starts talking. You know, Collier, the work on the sites is going well. I am satisfied with labor indicators of all brigades, but still I am convinced that further improvement is possible through better coordination of forces, more effective use of the mental potential of the Germans, and appropriate encouragement of people for good results. A concrete plan is ready in my mind, but I do not have enough men to carry it out. The nature of the work will change. Deliveries, i.e. and unloading, will decrease. The proportion of skilled work in unpacking, canning, stowing and registering equipment will rapidly increase. The base includes 4 sites with 12 prisoner-of-war brigades, and I have Russian personnel only an accountant, a standardizer, and 4 site supervisors with master's qualifications. I need engineers, and I need a coordinator with good knowledge of both German and Russian languages. Do you think you will be able to find a team of 12-15 engineers in the camp? You will try to manage the whole business. Then I will support you in any way I can. The fact is that the production start date of the new shops under construction now depends on the pace of providing equipment for the installation of production equipment. I repeat, I will provide any assistance that I am able to provide. I would like to create the position of a senior foreman and immediately put you in this position. It is clear that I can't remember this speech verbatim, but I think I repeated the idea correctly. I understand that Kabazenko offers an agreement, a kind of contract, the fulfillment of which will benefit both the customer in the person of the chief of the base and the prisoners of war, if only he fulfills his promises. The extent of the duties and promises exceeds anything previously encountered during the captivity. If I agree, I will be responsible for the living conditions of about 250 compatriots. I will be responsible for the early introduction of new workshops into production. I'm afraid that in case of failure, they may accuse me of sabotage. Give me 24 hours to think and consult. Agreed. Consult with whom? I have no confidence in the new camp. Brigadiers of the other brigades consider me an unscrupulous competitor, but I have 2 trump cards: knowledge of Russian and experience in communicating with standardizers. With difficulty, I managed to gather 11 foremen for a meeting in the evening. I explained to them the proposal of the head of the base and the benefits that we could bring us the adoption of the contract. None of the foremen knew more than 20 words in Russian, and the stronger was their distrust of a foreign upstart who asked them to cooperate with him. It was difficult to convince them that Kabazenko was an honest man, and that the proposed contract was not a trick of the factory management to speed up the construction of the workshops at the expense of the extreme exploitation of prisoners of war. The final result of the meeting can be summarized as follows. Let's act, we'll talk about the results when we have them. The tone of this statement had a threatening undertone. It was much easier to select engineers than to get the brigadiers to agree by persuasion. The Gulag used too poorly at that time the great potential of professional abilities of intellectuals and specialists among the prisoners of war. Doctors of all sciences, professors, engineers worked as diggers, experienced craftsmen were forced to perform black labor. It was only necessary to announce in the camp about the creation of a brigade of engineers, and instantly 30-40 people willing to do so gathered. It turned out that 2 of them in peacetime worked in those shops of German chemical plants, whose equipment was unloaded on the basis of trophy equipment. With the support of the senior camp, chose 20 engineers of different specialties, including mechanical engineers, chemists, electricians, and so on. When the next day I met Nikolai Porfirievich in the factory gatehouse, I announced my agreement with the proposed contract, which was sealed with a handshake. Viewed from the position of a free man of the present time, such an event is nothing special. From the standpoint of a German prisoner of war of Stalin's time, such an approach to the matter could be considered a pure miracle. The Soviet superior treats the prisoner of war as an equal partner. This was to be considered a new quality of relationship. And the Soviet partner began to act with incredible speed. Returning from the factory to the camp, I had to report immediately to the labor chief, who announced without preamble, "From tomorrow, all the brigades of the trophy equipment base stand under your leadership. You in the factory are directly subordinate to the head of the base. For better organization of work, you will go to the factory without a guard. We will give you a corresponding document. Go to the factory half an hour before the brigades leave. You'll get your labor assignment at the factory's gatehouse. The labor performance of most of the brigades at the site leaves much to be desired. We expect you to change the situation radically. Go ahead." He said, went back to his work at the desk and did not pay any more attention to me. It was felt that such an order issued clearly reluctant. Someone from the outside exalts the man who is anathema to us, so probably thought the chief of labor. They let me through the gatehouse alone, without a guard. The way to the factory gate is like a spring walk. I start whistling and singing. They know me at the factory gate. I ask them to issue outfits. Nikolai Porfirievich told you to call to clarify the labor assignment. Iya says to me the duty officer, picks up the phone, shouts, "Commutator. Girl, give me 345, and hands me the receiver." Exciting with excitement. The last telephone conversation I had 4 years ago in German. I hear the voice of the head of the base, Take paper and pencil from the duty officer. Write down, dictates me a whole novel. On what sites, what tasks to perform, who and how many people you put. Your business. You know best of all who can do what. You will arrange the teams, then the rationing officer will come to you, and together with him you will write out the orders. Clearly, this is how he will ensure the fulfillment of his obligations. If he gives me the right to participate in the issuance of work orders, then there is no need to fear non-fulfillment of norms. The second step forward is prepared at the first meeting of Kabuzenko with the engineering team. He has a good command of German. Greeting the new team, refusing the services of an interpreter, there are approximately 5,000 crates stored on the sites. They contain equipment for the caprolactam production shop and the caustic soda production shop. A group of civilian German engineers are working on projects to rebuild these shops at our plant. They urgently need specifications of all pieces of equipment that have reached our sites. Your task is to ensure that the contents of the crates are unpacked and recorded as quickly as possible, canned and stored under roofs for those units that may suffer from weathering. The grounds are extensive, with crates standing on average 100 meters away from storage buildings. The weight of the crates is up to 10 tons. The crates will have to be transported manually on rollers, laying plank walkways for this purpose. The work is huge and physically demanding, but some crates contain material handling equipment, including electric winches and cranes. Now listen well. I authorize the use of any mechanisms that you manage to put in motion. I'll still write the standards on a manual labor basis. Here are the packing specifications. Here is a senior foreman who speaks Russian. I wish you success. We got down to business, found the appropriate boxes, and in a short time we managed to introduce mechanisms for dragging boxes and lifting heavy equipment from the level of the territory to the loading and unloading work of the warehouse grounds. Imagine what it looks like to drag a 10-ton crate with dimensions 2x to x5 meters on sandy soil for a distance of 100-200 meters. 4 people laying planks, 2 people shifting rollers forward, and 20 people equipped with crowbars move the load at a snail's pace. It takes at least 5-6 hours per 100 meters. Now we have a 10-ton electric winch. All the crates are on skids. Attach the winch rope, turn on the electric motor, and the crate went at the speed of a pedestrian. This corresponds to an increase in labor productivity by 1,000%. It was possible to create similar conditions at all sites. It was necessary to act reasonably. For the increase in labor productivity can be awarded the title of Hero of Labor and can be imprisoned for deception. It is important for us to keep the norm of manual labor and at the same time to provide the head of the base with a noticeable acceleration of the process of unpacking and registration of equipment. We have agreed with the rationing engineer not to exceed 200 on average for the facility. Single results up to 300 should not be excluded. It was painstaking work to compose a report on 13 orders taking into account the established limits. The standardizer was a real worker. He did not refuse to sit in the evenings and, most often, using my services to make a daily report. But Nikolai Porfiryevich Kabuzenko made one more step forward. Socialist competition for high labor performance was continuously held by order from above. None of the prisoners of war, except the officials of the political staff, paid any attention to this event. The results of the competition represented a kind of Potemkin villages. NPK proposed to breathe life into this fruitless endeavor. We set specific tasks, for the fulfillment of which a cash bonus was written out. Brigades took on the corresponding obligations and NPK. And this was to be considered an absolute innovation, formalized the case in the form of a written contract signed by him and the brigadier of the brigade. I still keep as a relic one copy of such a contract. I give the text below. Accomplished showed. It is given to this brigade beep no. 9/2001 that when the brigade completes by September 1, 47 the task of dragging 80 pieces of boxes into the warehouse sector B with unpacking, stacking and evaluation, the latter receives a bonus in the amount of 500 rubles. The head of the base trough. Obor, NP Kabuzenko. 16.8. 40. It should be noted that the fulfillment of the tasks set by the chief of the base did not require any special physical efforts from the prisoners of war. Everything at the facility was directed to the maximum use of mental abilities. Non-fulfillment of brigade obligations was not allowed, and in case of difficulties, informal inter-brigade agreements on assistance were concluded with the condition of payment of a certain share of the bonus. The trophy equipment base jumped from the last place in the camp in terms of labor indicators to the leading position in 3 or 4 weeks. 200% fulfillment of labor norms had never happened in the camp before. To get into one of the brigades of the base in the past time was considered a misfortune, because for failure to fulfill the norms reduced rations. Now all the guys in the camp could see that the base brought better food and cash. To get into the base brigade became considered a great success. In addition to legal benefits, there were illegal sources of income at the base. There was, for example, the silver mine. When studying the packing specifications, one of our chemists was convinced that, among other things, brought equipment, the production of he knew from experience that the equipment included a refrigerator with pipes made of pure silver. As a result of a thorough search, the corresponding box was found. It was possible to dismantle and hide the silver part of the refrigerator. Such a deposit of raw materials for jewelers gave income for a long time. A whole underground artel of jewelers worked in the camp, making rings, necklaces, and other jewelry, which were sold to local residents through a secret trade organization. Sometimes such items also served to gain the favor of some officials, both German and Soviet. For a long time, this branch of craft activity operated on the basis of silver ores from the base of trophy equipment, due to the fact that the local civilian population valued silver very low. Another type of raw material for making rings was stainless steel hexagonal nuts. Rings made of this material with a polished surface were in great demand, and bollards were delivered by the hundreds from the base, where a whole series of boxes of chrome nickel steel piping, including flange bolts and nuts, were found. The flow of raw materials and finished goods had to overcome a series of barriers in the form of search points, and the searchers were very interested in finding the finished goods. There were rumors that particularly successful power traders were supported by administrative officials who were, as an exception, secret Soviet-German deals of a larger size appeared, one of which cannot be omitted. One fine day in the spring of 1947, I went into the bureau of the chief of the largest site of the base. This master was in charge of no less than 2,000 boxes of all kinds of sizes, placed on top of each other in 4 or 5 tiers. He greeted me very politely, offered me tea, and began. "Listen, Collier, we need to urgently find box no. Such and such. Put 1 brigade to find this box for me today. In case of success, please open it carefully from the side, determine the contents, and report to me about the result." Again, some mine, I think, but I answer, we will immediately fulfill. And so we did. We found a box with the specified number, opened it, and what luck. The content, 14 pieces of transmission belts made of cowhide leather in rolls up to 40 centimeters wide and up to 1 meter in diameter. The length of such a piece was determined to be about 20-25 meters. The material of the belts is glued from 3 or 4 layers of natural leather. In my mind, I estimate that from one such belt you can get 500 pairs of soles for shoes, pairs for 30 rubles at the bazaar, a total of 15,000 rubles. That's crazy. I have a to the head of the site, and he explains, I have a certificate for receiving firewood from unpacking boxes. I will have to load it on the car. The firewood is in warehouse no. Bring 1 belt to this warehouse. It is necessary to hide it, and as soon as the car comes, put the belt there and then cover it with firewood. 1 belt for you to bury in a safe place. The box is to be corked as neatly as possible. Is that clear? And how would it not be clear to me? There are 2 pairs of soles for every worker on the base. The most important thing is not to catch any contraband during the search at the factory entrance. Within 2 months, a few soles went missing at this critical location. Apparently, the selected contraband was kept by the janitors who carried out the search. That is, no one asked where the soles of such a magnificent material came from. There was no investigation. Trading in soles became a new branch of the camp's shadow economy. Then we realized how the USSR dealt with the loss of valuable material, the amount of which was registered in the packing specifications. During the next check round the sites, a group of people who had gathered on the 4th tier of the stack near the notorious box with straps caught. Well, I think it's a lost cause. The deficit has been established. There will be an investigation. It would be good to know the prosecutor's decision immediately. I climb the stack, salute, stand in the background. 2 comrades are busy opening the box from the back, still tightly packed side. They opened it, pulled out the straps, counted them, and it turned out to be 12 pieces. The order to the brigade to drag the belts to the storehouse of valuables, which is near the bureau of the chief of the site. The commission goes to the bureau, and I, the cheeky one, join it. Sitting down, one member of the commission prepares paper, pen and ink, and begins to write. As we Janet. We, the commission consisting of Ivan Ivanovich, head of the site, no. Pavel Pavlovich, the chief accountant. Fedor Fedorov, deputy director of the trust. Bukharin Alexander Alexandrovich, captain of militia. We gathered on June 1947 to check the contents of the box of trophy equipment, no, and to verify it with the packing specification. According to the packing list, there are 14 belts in the box. On opening the completely undamaged crate, only 12 belts were found. There is a deficit of 2 belts, and this report has been drawn up. Data, signature Invasius, signature Chien. This closed the case of the disappearance of 2 transmission belts worth about 30,000 rubles. The search for the belts continued. A number of similar boxes were found, the contents of which were honestly dragged into the storehouse of valuables, no less than 50 pieces in all, shortly after the end of the campaign to find the belts. Unknown criminals broke into the valuables warehouse at night and thoroughly cleared it out. Not a single belt was left. Some pathetic remnants were found near the railroad track at another site, close to the border of the factory territory. Whether the thieves were caught was impossible for us to know. What was important for us was the fact that out of the total number of these valuable belts we managed to use for our own needs, not 1, but 3. In the summer of 1947, the base of the trophy equipment was considered a strike object. Labour indicators did not find similar ones in the camp, so the superiors were satisfied. Acceleration of the pace of unpacking the equipment forced the director of the plant to come, who before the formation thanked everyone and informed us about the payment of additional bonus, so the head of the base was satisfied. The object base took the first place in the socialist competition, so the politicians were also satisfied. What a joy. Everyone is happy. Everyone is paid in cash. One could buy additional products, tobacco and, sometimes, even alcoholic beverages. As for products of this kind, my first encounter with them in captivity could lead to serious consequences. It's the end of the month. It is time for the rationing officer to make a monthly report. He turns to me with a request for help. He appreciates my help as I calculate percentages on the arithmometer much faster than he does on the accounts. He can't do anything with the arithmometer. We finish the work late in the evening. The standardizer expresses his gratitude, takes his wallet out of his pocket, pulls out 2 10-rublevki and says, "Take it, go to the kiosk, drink 200 grams for my..." At that time, the kiosk in front of the factory gate was working round the clock, as the plant adopted a 3-shift labour system. I considered the Norma's instruction as an order, went to the kiosk, ordered 200 grams and drank it in a gulp. Oh, how warm I felt in my stomach. I walked towards the camp. It took me about 20 minutes to walk, and I felt an unusual lightness of body. I start to float in the clouds, but my limbs fail to control me. I stagger like a sailor on deck in stormy weather. So I barely make it to the gatehouse. I remember what thoughts at that moment swirled in my head. To step straight through, to salute, to report on my return from the workplace. To do all this without wobbling, I succeeded. Whether the duty officer did not pay attention or considered it inappropriate to catch a drunken prisoner, I do not know. It is quite clear, however, that the ability of my brain to memorize anything instantly failed as soon as I opened the inner door of the gatehouse. Chained to my senses in the morning, lying on my bunk, a comrade shouts, "Time to go to work." Half the night I, it turns out, slept in the yard. They found me there and dragged me to the residential building. It was summer, but what if this adventure had taken place in the winter in a severe frost? In August 1947, the camp's anti-fascist activists organized a labor conference to share the experience of the shock brigades as a means of increasing labor productivity. In honor of this conference, they made a board of honor on which they displayed portraits of the most successful production workers of the camp branch. The honor board was installed opposite the entrance hall. The portraits are arranged in a triangle, and on the very top is my portrait. On the next tiers from below are the base foremen. Naturing from the factory, quite by chance I observe such an incident. Captain Glazunov stands in front of the board, looking through the rows of photos, which obviously does from the bottom up. About 10 meters away from him, a prisoner of war walks, and on the way from the housing building steps an employee of the political department, Lieutenant Abramov. Suddenly Glazunov shouts to the prisoner of war to come over to him, points his finger at my portrait and says "Weg," which means "die" or "remove" in German. Lieutenant Abramov rushes to the honor board and explains to Captain Glazunov, quite legibly, that the portrait will remain in place. They almost fought, and the portrait stayed in place. The victory of politics over admission. This was the last meeting with Glazunov, who clearly did not like me. His successor, Lieutenant Colonel Romanov, preferred to be guided by sober, reasonable reasoning instead of emotional explosions. Our relationship with him was normal. And to whom were we indebted for such success? Nikolai Porfirovich Kabuzenko, a Ukrainian, who managed to interest the prisoners of war with a well-balanced cocktail of demands and gifts. He treated me personally like a father to his son. At any moment he was ready to listen to my concerns about unsolved problems, was ready to think over the possibilities of their solution, and always with great persistence took care of the implementation of the decisions made. It is impossible not to mention that in the course of serious work, there were also not quite honest deeds, such as, for example, the story with alcohol. Remember, Collier, if you are not in the know, that German measuring instruments are cleaned only with 98% alcohol, pure alcohol, not denatured. If someone asks you, give him such information. Nikolai Porfirovich made such an instruction and convinced me that he was right. A week later he handed me a warehouse order and told me to go with a cart to Warehouse No, to get 2 cylinders of 30 liters of pure technical alcohol for cleaning German measuring devices. These cylinders were kept in the bureau of the base chief, and only he had the right to distribute this valuable liquid in small portions. The instruments were cleaned with gasoline, and the alcohol was used to raise the spirits of the base's laborers. Some of the prisoners of war learned to drink 98% alcohol without diluting it with water, both Germans and experienced Russians, who tried to teach the Germans to drink for real. My field of endeavor eventually moved to clerical work at a desk. The volume of warehouse accounting grew more and more. Specifications were made by German engineers who, although they spoke simple phrases in Russian, could not write. Nikolai Porfirovich got me the best general technical German-Russian dictionary of that time and taught me to translate from German into Russian card index documents. It was a job to my liking. It was the first time I encountered the complications that come in the way of translating the technical jargon of 2 countries at different levels of technical development. It was a course on the level of a university foreign language department, and direct contact with engineers from both languages allowed for a much deeper insight into technical translation than pure academic study. I was so fond of studying, which was very important for my future life at home, but harmful to the cause of strengthening my position as a senior foreman of the base. There were organizers and intriguers. I thanked the organizers for the good deed. I did not suspect the existence of intriguers. Blindness in this respect I could not overcome in all my life. The struggle for power remained alien to me, and it is not surprising that I did not suffer much from it. The basic rule of such a struggle is destroy the one who has been overthrown from his position of power, so that he will never be able to rise again. But to smash me in this environment proved to be quite a difficult task. To overthrow the senior foreman of the best by labor indicators object of the camp, in an environment of complete success and friendly relations with the bosses of the plant, this was not even worth thinking about. But there is a principle of soft evolution instead of loud revolution. Besides, I must confess that my interest in further leading a healthy labor organism began to disappear. There is an explanation for this. I was born under the constellation of Taurus. Taurus is peculiar to have ideas, spend a lot of effort to implement them, but having achieved success, he is looking for a new sphere of action, where you need a push to create a new quality. I have not managed to get rid of this character vice during my professional life, so I simply did not want to fight for the preservation of power. A new assignment, an interesting assignment. The camp authorities, especially the chief of the political department, were led to believe that this Fritz J. with his experience influenced the increase of labor productivity of only one object, while in the position of propagandist he could raise the labor indicators of all working objects of the camp. This is how the unwanted promotion back to the Olympus of the anti-fascist activists caught up with me. I managed to continue my studies in technical translation. Up to the end of the registration of trophy equipment, Nikolai Porfirovich wrote out orders to my address for the translation of cards of the warehouse accounting of the base. He paid 50 kopecks per card. Not much, but it was the first fee paid to me as a technical translator.